Hi everybody, hope you're having a wonderful morning. This is Sunday morning, kind of sticking in this morning for the weather, and thought I would do a little tutorial. This tutorial is going to be on layering different objects. What is layering? How can you layer? In what ways with the watercolor can you layer? So there's this, a couple different ways. I mean, you can, these are beginner friendly, so I don't go into really a lot of depth into stuff. I just touch on some simple things, techniques for beginners. Excuse me. So I have several different objects, and I'm going to do a wet on wet, a wet on dry, and then mix and do the same thing, and then kind of mix on top of that, layer on top of those things as they dry, because the whole idea is with layering, if I have a voice this morning, excuse me, I don't know, boy, sometimes, depending on the day, it just takes my voice. Probably you have some of the same similar things, but anyway, we'll get through it. So layering is you put down one layer, you put down a light wash. Start with something very light, then a little darker the next time on top of dry, a little darker the next time, a little more pigmented the next time, and you just keep building up. So I just want to kind of show you. I meant to move my brushes all out of the way, but I didn't do it. So, okay, we're going to get, in this particular one, no, first I'm going to use a flat brush. Okay, so this is a flat brush. For anyone that doesn't know that, most people do, but some people don't. That that are just very, very, very beginning on their painting journey. So I'm going to put it in the water, wipe a little off, but not much, and we're going to go into this one here. This is I actually decided to use hot press paper today to kind of show you the little bit of difference of what it looks like on hot press paper. I mean, there's a little difference. Okay, so we want a very light wash. So I'm just going to get a little bit of paint, and I'm going to water it down again. Probably water it down again, okay? Get my paintbrush in there, get some of that paint off, because I want a very light wash. See? Just so you can barely see that it's on there. I'm going to try to leave a white spot, white space. If we have it too wet, then it's just going to all run down the page, and that's not, that's another wet on wet. But right now I want to actually paint an object with this idea. Okay, so now that's pretty wet, so we're going to let that first layer dry. Make sure that kind of sops some of it up to dry it a little quicker. Now on here, I'm not going to put water down first on this egg. I just decided to do some eggs because I've been doing eggs for Easter things. So I'm going to take some wet paint that's on my palette. It's quite wet. Let me show you. The first one, I used this, but I watered it down quite a few times. This is quite a watery substance, right? But I'm going to come over here to my dry page, and we're going to put it on. It really doesn't, do much of anything different, really. It's just that it's not as watery, right? So there isn't as much water that I'm dealing with in both places, both the paper and the brush. So it doesn't look a whole lot different, right? Not really. Take some of that out there. So now that was wet on wet. This is wet on dry. So that's, I moved it around a little, and we'll let that dry. Moving around the paint just means taking your brush or whatever you're using and moving it, or literally moving it around. Now, while those are drying, we're going to come out over here into the leaf. I thought I'd make some leaves, so we're going to wet this one. So this is called the wet on wet. Don't want to do quite as much as I did the first time. Okay, so we're going to take, and we need, as we said before, a very light wash. So I'm not going to get much paint. I need it to be quite watered down. Come over here, and again, it's a very light amount of pigment that's going down onto my paper. Very light wash, it's called. And leaving a white space right here. I'm not going to paint it. I'm going to leave it for the highlights or the white space part of the paper. Let that all dry. That was wet on wet. Wet on wet, remember, it moves a little bit. Wet on dry, well, actually, wet on wet will move a lot. Wet on dry won't move as much. So we're going to keep this dry, but we're going to go into my paint that's wet. Very wet wash on my palette. And I'm going to put it down here. And another thing about it is when it's not wet on wet, I'm controlling it more. I'm doing the moving around of the paint versus when you have the wet on wet, it's going to move itself, right? It does its own moving around. Now we're going to do this also for I'm going to get all that green off. Wet my brush, come over here, and I have this little rectangle here that I'm depicting as the sky. Sorry for my voice this morning, guys. I didn't know it was going to be that way, but it's a rainy day, like humid. That's what'll do it every time. Okay, so I'm going to start out with a very light blue. Very little bit of blue on my brush, not much, because I just want a light wash, remember? So this is wet on wet. Actually, I meant to section this off. The bottom part of this sky will be dry, mainly just dry. So I'm going to take that water off. Sorry about that. Okay, so on the top part, I've got the wet on wet. And it'll kind of move around the way it wants to. And then I'm going to get some of that same mixture with just the water on my brush and nothing on the paper. It's not going to go down as easy. I'm going to have to apply it more. It moves, remember, with the wet on wet, it moved itself. Well, with on the dry, unless I had a sopping wet brush, putting all that water down here with the brush, it's not going to. I've got to maneuver it a lot myself. Whereas up here, it kind of moved around on its own. All right. Now, it's down here. I have some trees. So I'm just going to wet right over that for another section. Because here, I just want to show you it a little bit in a different way. So we're going to have that. And what I want to depict in the background, that like say in the background, there's just these trees, and it's just a depiction of trees. I don't want them defined at all. I just want a light wash, it's called, in the background that indicate trees. And I'm going like this because, trees are straight up and down, or, so I do that a little bit at the tops. Okay, so we've got a wash here that's very light in color. You can barely see it, right? So that's the first layer. That's our first layer of paints. All right, so I'm going to wash everything off the brush. We're going to come back here. I'm actually going to grab a different brush. I'm going to grab a round brush. And I love these, so I'm going to grab this. This is a transcend round brush with a point, a nice point. Come up here to the first one. It's pretty much dry now. We're going to get some paint on the, some water on the brush, not too much paint, not too much, just enough to, you know, use it. Because right now we want a, you know, a little bit darker, not a lot darker, just a little darker. So you see, we have, I just want to keep some of the bottom layer so you can see the difference, not come over the whole thing. So that's actually going to even take a little bit of that out. Okay, so you can kind of see actually the two layers. Okay. Another thing, when you're, excuse me, making layers, it's always the morning when I have all these issues. I'm not exactly sure why, but okay. So we're going to come down. No, I'm sorry, that was wet on wet. Okay, so now I'm going to dry my brush quite a bit. This is all dry. And I'm not going to add water. So we're just going to take a little bit stronger pigment to go on top of this first layer to add the second layer. You can see the difference. Okay, so you can see first layer, and we have a medium color layer over the first layer. Okay, so that's, you can see the difference. This is darker and darker. I'll choose the left side of everything to depict that. Okay, so now we're going to go to this one here, and we got our first wash down. So we're going to go in, and I'm not going to change the color. I just want to have more of the color for this layer here. And you'll see, because we're only on the second layer here. If I wanted to do just a couple layers, then that'd be different. But for the most part here, I just want to depict a couple layers at the moment. Right? And then on the dry one, we're coming down to another layer on top of the first layer. I love these brushes. I can just do large areas, I can do tight areas, small areas. This beautiful tip. And so you can see you've got those two layers there. Now for this triangle, a rectangle, boy, okay. I'm going to use the flat one again. So we have wet on wet, so I'm going to have a pretty wet brush. Get my blue, and over this layer, I'm going to add another layer. Some more water. Don't want too much water because I don't want to activate what's underneath. I want to layer this on top, and you have to make sure that what's underneath is also completely dry. So here we have another layer. You can barely see it, but it's there. Same thing here. This was the dry, wet on dry. But it's pretty much, it's going to look a little darker. Okay, now we're going to do something that is going to look a little bit different. You'll see the difference a bit more. I'm going to take my flat, a little bit bigger, this flat brush here, which is a 3/4 flat. I've got this light wash of green, but I want to put a little bit darker pigment on there, so I'm going to get some more paint, but with less well, on this side I'm going to put more water, on this side I'm going to put less water. So using a lot of water, or quite a lot of water with my paint, I'm going to do the same thing I did, like this, right on top of that, not covering it all up. So I can kind of see the, so I'm going to take a lot of water off, come over here to this side, which is the dry side. Very little water on my brush, very little. And I'm going to do the same thing without covering up all that's behind it. It doesn't look a whole lot different, just a different, a little darker pigment, right? So that's the second layer to those, the sky and the trees. So by now you're probably definitely getting the gist of this. you let it dry, and you put another layer. Excuse me, and dry and another layer, dry and another layer. Okay, so now this is all dry now. So most of, it's dry. It's certainly dry enough to continue on. So now we're going to go right back to the start of this one. We're going to get more paint on our brush, less water, even though that's still a little wet, and I want it to be a little bit wet still. So we're going to come over here. You see that? It's moving a little, but not much. So now you can see that I have 3 layers. Smooth it out a little, but we have 3 layers. You can see it. I'm going to come right down here. Oops, got the paint. I'm going to come down onto the dry one, and I'm going to put another layer. That's the 3rd layer. Move it around, smooth it out. So now we have 3 layers on that egg. You can see them, right? 1, 2, 3. So you see what's happening here? We let it dry, or mostly dry for the wet on wet. I don't let it dry all the way. Now I'm going to go to the green again. Get some onto my palette, get it pretty wet. Come over here to the one that's still pretty wet and add this 3rd layer. Darker color. If you keep putting this, obviously if you kept putting the same color, you'll have layers, but you won't have gradual, what they call, gradual layers or layering. The actual reason you want to layer is to, build from light to darker. So you're going to come down here on this one that's more dry, add the same color but more pigment, meaning darker, stronger. And then we have a 3rd layer on our leaf, right? I'm sure by now you're definitely getting the whole concept here. So I'm going to go to the blue. We'll finish it up though. I'm going to do wet on wet. So here we are, much more pigmented, okay? Much more paint on there. Take some of that off. To do a gradual, you just come down and down, and you just, or go up and lighten it and put that paint to the top. So we have the 3 layers of the blue. 1, 2, and to the top of it, 3. More pigment. So that's our 3rd layer. Or we could go on the side, use the side of our brush like that. And then we're going to go down to the green, and I'm going to get a little darker green added in there. And then we're going to, with more wet, I'm going to go on top of this. This is our 3rd layer of the darker green. More watered down, very watery. So it's, not real pronounced. You can make it out, but it's still quite, what's the word? It's still defined, but not a lot. And on the drier one here, take all that water out. The side of my brush, like we're putting that in there. And so that's 3 layers on each one. We're going to do 1 more layer, and that will be it, because I'm quite sure that you are understanding, but I want you to see what the last layer is more going to look like. I'll keep the flat brush. I'm going to go into a little deeper red, and I'm hardly putting any water. I'm even taking some off. I want a real striking color here. I want something strong because I'm on my last layer. You see the difference? I'm going to do the same thing here because my brush is quite dry. See, I want a real strong, for my last layer, I want it real, this is going to move a little bit because this is a bit wet. Remember, we know that. I just move some out of the way so you can see all the layers. Same thing here. Slap some of that water right out of it. So we're doing mostly dry. So that's, you know, the eggs are the best one to see it on, I guess. So you got that fourth layer is your strongest color, or the last layer is what I meant to say. The last layer that you're going to put on. Okay? It's going to be the strongest, the one you're going to see the most, the one that jumps up off the page at you. Green, same way. I want to get a nice dark green here. And we're going to go right up here. Look at the difference. Very, very strong difference on the green. You can tell a lot. Right? Just moving my brush around, and it's a bit wet, so it's moving around a little bit, but I want to keep that gradients there, or the difference, the layer, so you can see it. I'm going to do the same thing, take all that water out, most of that water out, just that I got a lot of water on the palette. So let's see if I can get just more color. Okay. That's the color I wanted right there. Okay. So come back up here, put this in to really show that difference. Really, really show the difference. Don't want it to bleed in there. So that was 4 layers. So now in the sky, we'll do the same thing. We'll get the blue, get it very, very strong, add it again. Come down a little, add it again. I'm using this part of my brush right now, going back and forth and coming back up. This is with the flat of the brush. This is with the end of the chisel part, they call it. So that's all those layers going on, and then we go into the nice deep green here, and over the 4th layer for these trees. Same idea, nice and dark. Mix some sepia in with that, and you can really tell. So there we are, folks. That is objects and layering them with several different layers, how it works, what it looks like, using a couple different brushes. You can use whatever brush you want, depending on the object, is whether you might want the flat or whether you might want the round, but they can all be used for all the different things. Depends on how you maneuver that brush around. That's why getting used to brushes is a really good idea, painting with different ones. I hope this has been helpful to you. I hope you've enjoyed it. Check out my other tutorials. There's a lot of other helpful information and tips and so forth, and some fun, actually, with some Easter tutorials, Easter Bunny. And have a really great rest of your day, folks. Bye for now.